So Prime Minister, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just is continuing, of course, his two-day visit to Austria. The Prime Minister, of course, there to push the relationship forward with this important Central European country. Today, meeting with the Chancellor of Austria, the President of Austria, holding delegation-level talks, meeting the business leaders, the business CEOs, as well as meeting members of the Indian community, though that's the Indian community bit is going to happen in a couple of hours. So we're just going to walk you through why this visit is important, what the Prime Minister has discussed during his time there. Just to begin with, he of course landed in Austria yesterday. He was received by the Foreign Minister of Austria at the airport. He was coming off of the back of a visit to Moscow, which we covered in great detail here on India Today Global. So after that, he sort of lands in Austria, meets with the Foreign Minister, meets with the Chancellor Karl Nehammer, and that was the a fairly light first day. But on the second day, he really Prime Minister Modi got into a lot of his most important meetings. He had delegation level talks with the Chancellor Karl Nehammer. He met the President Alexander von der Bellen, and also has also had the opportunity to talk to CEOs from the from Austria and India. Now, the major things that the Prime Minister is hoping to get out of this visit, first of all, is on the economic side. He's made very clear that he wants closer economic cooperation with Austria. There is talk of investments in infrastructure, in technology, in cooperation in terms of science, in artificial intelligence, quantum computing. That's something that's very important to India. In investments, what India wants is infrastructure, renewable energy. Those are some very key segments on which India wants to work much more closely together with Austrian companies. And this is important because over the last year or so, you've seen India and Austria set up a startup bridge, which is basically a mechanism to allow Indian startups to move more easily to Austria and for Austrian startups to come to India. So it allows greater innovation, allows greater cooperation between the industries of both countries. So that's something that was very important that was discussed on the economic side. Of course, very few conversations with a European country can take place without a conversation on Ukraine. That certainly happened. The Prime Minister again reiterating during his press statement what he has really taken to saying since his visit to Moscow, which is that there are no solutions to be found on the battlefield, that dialogue and diplomacy will have to be the way forward for a solution to the crisis in Ukraine. A conversation also happened on what the crisis in West Asia, which is really the Israel-Hamas conflict that is going on right now. So that's economy. There are also broader strategic issues that were discussed, some conversation about, of course, migration, given that you have a migration mobility agreement between the two countries. And also you've had around over 30,000 Indians in Austria. Speaking, of course, of the Indian diaspora, they were sort of out in force to welcome the Prime Minister. The visuals of the Indian diaspora in Austria, which is around 30,000 people, came out, sort of welcomed the Prime Minister, came to his hotel. Of course, there were also other visuals that stuck out of this this visit, which is of course an Austrian band playing Vande Mataram in front of the Prime Minister. So just some interesting visuals that have gotten a lot of attention in India, but of course a lot to do substantively as well in terms of bilateral conversations. But another interesting thing that is worth talking about in terms of why this relationship matters, India and Austria. Of course, on one level, India has been looking to expand its relationship with European countries, particularly highly developed economies like Austria. What you would have heard again and again throughout the course of today is that this is the first time in 41 years that an Indian Prime Minister has actually gone to Austria. That's been since 1983. There was Indira Gandhi who was there last. This is quite surprising because India and Austria have had typically a fairly close relationship. Something that has come into as a topic of discussion is that today is that this 2024 is the 75th anniversary of the diplomatic relationship between of the establishment of diplomatic relations between India and Austria. Of course, what we also have is a reminder that Jairam Ramesh, in fact, of the Congress party, sort of took to the internet to tell us, and that the Chancellor of Austria also came out and reminded us of, was that in 1955, India actually had a pretty key role to play in Austria achieving its independence. The very interesting thing to remember here is that Austria was part of the Axis powers, which were basically led by Nazi Germany against the Allied powers in World War II. They were defeated, and Austria was subsequently occupied, as Germany was, by Allied powers like America, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. And until 1955, Austria was not an independent country, and a negotiation on whether Austria should be given its independence back had been stalled for several years in the 1940s and 1950s, until the Austrians came up with the idea of going to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru of India, talking to him about interceding, given his reputation as an international statesman with the Soviet Union, to get a deal through on this. And in fact, one of the interesting things to remember is that Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru actually took up this task. He did go to the Soviet Union. He did make this proposal on behalf of Austria. He made the proposal that Austria, if it was given its independence, would actually follow a policy of military neutrality. That is, it would not allow any foreign troops on its soil that could threaten Russia's foreign policy and its security interests. So this was something very interesting, and in 1955, a state treaty went through that gave Austria its independence, and newly independent Austria, the first statesman that it hosted for a state visit was in fact Jawaharlal Nehru. So, a sort of interesting relationship there between India and Austria, India playing a role in Austria's independence, which the Chancellor of Austria in his press statement actually with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the very first thing he remarked on was this relationship and this past history. But of course, in the last 40 years, you really haven't had that sort of close contact since 1983, although you have had the President of India. Two presidents of India have gone there, if my memory serves me correctly, Pratibha Patil and K.R. Narayanan. And you've, of course, also had ministerial level delegations, but nothing as a high level as this. But really what you see is increasingly that India is looking to turn, is trying to work with countries that it is typically not focused on as much. Last year you had Prime Minister Modi go to Greece. That was also an important visit, and really trying to reach out to important countries that have been somewhat traditionally neglected in Indian foreign policy. But that's what the Prime Minister will be up to in terms of trying to work with these countries, trying to bring them into the fold, trying to bring them into play, attract that investment into India. That's really the main focus of his visit. So what's going to happen today? He's already had delegation level talks. He's already had the press statement where he's talked about his priorities and what was discussed during this meeting. He's had the meeting with the business leaders from India and Austria. Now he's going to go on and meet the Indian community, after which he's going to fly back to India. So it's been a rather long 3-day visit abroad. He was on the 8th, he landed in Moscow. He was there on the 8th and the 9th. Then on the 9th he went to Austria, and then of course today the 10th he's also still in Austria, but then he'll be coming back and getting back into domestic affairs. But those were really the key highlights of Prime Minister Modi's visit, what he was trying to do in Austria, some of the background to this relationship. We'll keep you updated in case there are any other new developments in this story on the India-Austria side. Thank you so much for watching India Today Global.